People like to romanticize small-town Texas, wrap it up in porch swings, cicadas, and decency. But the truth, it's quieter than it is kind. I live alone in a one-story house with more dust than visitors. No kids, no husband. Just me, a shelf full of books, and a yard that I trim out of habit more than pride. I like it that way. Simple. Quiet. So when my phone rang, I almost let it go to voicemail. But the name, Gideon Hartwell, made me stare for a second. My brother rarely calls. When he does, it's not for catching up. His voice on the other end had that syrupy smoothness he used when we were kids, and he wanted something. "Hey, Mari," he said, dragging my name like it was some old tune. "Got a quick favor to ask." I didn't respond right away. I didn't have to. He filled the silence. "I'm seeing someone. Real classy. Ivy League type. Thought I'd bring her by. Show her how grounded and loving our family is." Grounded and loving. That would have been funny if it didn't sting so much. He chuckled, like we were in on the same joke. "You make the best brisket. No one else can make it feel like home like you can." She'd be impressed. There it was, the guilt grenade. I could already hear our mother's voice behind his words. "You're the reliable one, Mari. You always do what's best for the family." I rubbed the back of my neck. "When?" "This Saturday. Just dinner. I'll bring wine. You handle the rest?" I didn't want to say yes, but I also didn't want to argue. Not over the phone. Not again. "Fine," I muttered. 7. After we hung up, I stared out the window. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the floor. I thought about how many times he'd pulled this move, show up when it suited him, disappear just as fast. I remembered our mother tugging at my arm when I was 12, saying, "Be the bigger person, Mari. Your brother needs this." He always needed something, and I always gave it. I could have said no. I should have. But I'd learned long ago that refusing Gideon meant inviting chaos. And I was tired. Tired of being the reason things fell apart. Still, a question crept in and wouldn't leave. If family never gives back, is it still family duty or just self-sacrifice? Saturday came faster than I wanted. I spent the morning slow cooking brisket, letting the scent fill the house like it used to when Dad was alive. I followed his old notes. No shortcuts, no substitutions, cornbread from scratch, pecan pie just like he liked it. Not because Gideon deserved it, but because the memory of Dad did. The kitchen steamed with heat and effort. My back ached. My hands smelled like onions and smoke. And the whole time, I kept wondering, was this woman even worth impressing? Or was I just setting myself up to feel small again? I wiped my hands on my apron and stared at the table. It looked homey, honest, not polished or magazine perfect, just real. I muttered under my breath. Maybe this is the last time I say yes. The clock ticked past 6:30. I changed into something clean, brushed my hair. Then I waited. Gideon's car, black, sleek, too shiny for these parts, pulled into my gravel driveway at exactly 7. The engine purred before it cut off. I stood by the window, watching as he stepped out in a blazer like he was headed to a gallery opening. Then she emerged. Rowena Vale. Young. Polished. Expensive without trying. Her heels hit the ground like she wasn't sure they should touch Texas dirt. They walked up together. She looked around. At the sagging porch, the paint-chipped swing, the garden I barely kept alive. She didn't say a word, but her eyes did. She wasn't expecting this. When I opened the door, her smile was too controlled, too nice. "You must be Mari," she said, holding out a manicured hand. "I've heard so much about you." I shook it. "Hope some of it's true." She laughed politely, the way you laugh when you don't really want to. Inside, I led them to the table. I noticed her glance at the furniture. Every piece mismatched, worn, but clean. She sat carefully, like she was worried the chair might splinter. I didn't say much, neither did she. Gideon tried, tossing around small talk like confetti, hoping something would stick. Then came the sentence. As I was serving the brisket, Rowena leaned forward, set her napkin down, and smiled like she was about to compliment the food. Instead, she said, "So Gideon told me you used to be the black sheep of the family. This must be a big deal for you." The room fell quiet, not because she shouted, but because the words cut cleaner than a slap. That sentence hit harder than silence ever could. I set the table with the same care I gave every holiday growing up. Plates spaced evenly, silverware straight, napkins folded. It was habit more than hope. Across from me, Rowena smiled politely, saying something about the warmth of the brisket aroma. But her eyes? They skimmed the bookshelf, the curtains, the nicked edges of my coffee table. Everything in her gaze was measured. She wasn't here for dinner. She was here to audit the space. She complimented the food as though reading from a guidebook on manners. "Oh, how charmingly rustic," she said, spooning the cornbread like it might bite her. Gideon, leaning back in his chair, took over the room like he always did. "Rowena's connected to the arts board downtown. Her last gallery pulled in sponsors from 3 states. She knows how to elevate a room." He grinned like she was a prize he'd won. Neither of them asked me about work, or my garden, or even how I'd been. I wasn't a sister tonight. I was stage lighting. I nodded through the stories. Rowena laughed at the right places, said, "Oh, you're bad," when Gideon made a joke that wasn't. My fork felt heavy. I told myself to breathe, to not read too much into it. But I felt that old disorientation, like showing up to a test you hadn't been told about. Then Rowena tilted her head and said, "This is lovely, but is that rosemary?" I blinked. "Yes. Why?" She dabbed her lips with a napkin. "I'm allergic, mildly. Nothing dangerous, just uncomfortable. Gideon said I loved rosemary, so I didn't mention it earlier." I looked at Gideon. He shrugged. "Thought you did. Honest mistake." I stood, pretending calm. "I'll take it out of the greens. It won't take long." As I moved to the stove, he added, "You know Mari's always been impulsive in the kitchen." They laughed. I did not. I scraped the greens into a colander with more force than necessary. As the steam rose, I caught my reflection in the oven door. Blank. Still. When I returned with a new side dish, Rowena stood to help. She began rearranging the plates I'd already set, leaned close, whispered, "Don't worry. These things happen in less curated homes." I didn't respond. I couldn't. My hands felt like bricks. That moment split something inside me. Later, as their voices floated from the living room, I found myself back in my own mind. 8 years old, standing behind the couch while the rest of the family posed for Christmas photos. "Just lean in from the side, Mari," Mom had said. "We want the tree in the shot." At 13, Gideon had told his friends I was too shy to come out and say hi, said I got weird around company. He laughed about it. I didn't. I was always there. Just cropped. Now Rowena was here, and this wasn't dinner. This was a campaign, a glossy brochure to show she'd landed a man from humble stock, with a sister sweet enough to host, but invisible enough not to outshine. I cleared the dishes. Going to get dessert. In the kitchen, I stood with both hands braced on the counter. The sink was empty, but I stared at it like it might answer something. Their laughter rolled through the walls like a breeze carrying dust. I'd prepped a creme brulee, even had the torch ready, but as I opened the fridge, I reached instead for the apple cobbler I made with leftover fruit from last week. The one Dad used to ask for when he'd had a bad day. I didn't plate it fancy, just spooned it warm into bowls and brought it out with no flair. Rowena smiled with her teeth. "Oh, how homey." Gideon cleared his throat. "It's comfort food, right?" I looked Rowena dead in the eye. "It's not curated. It's real." She blinked, said nothing more. It wasn't a victory, but it wasn't a surrender either. We ate in silence, forks tapping. After the last bite, Rowena set down her spoon and leaned toward me. "You do know we'll be hosting the next dinner. At our place, right?" Different vibe. I smiled, but my stomach turned because I knew what different vibe meant. A few days after that strange dinner, the phone rang again. Gideon. His voice was almost syrupy, a little too smooth, like he was trying to sell me something. "Hey, Mari. So listen, Rowena just loved your cooking. She won't stop talking about that brisket. She thought, it'd be nice to return the favor. Just a little dinner next week at her place. No pressure." The way he said no pressure already carried pressure. I hesitated. I wanted to say no, to tell him that dinner didn't feel like dinner, not with the way Rowena's compliments came dressed like critiques. But before I could say anything, he added, "It'd really mean a lot to her. She's putting effort in, you know. Wants to show you how much she respects you." I forced a smile he couldn't see and said, "Sure." That sure cost me more than I knew. I pulled up in front of Rowena's building the following Thursday evening. High-rise downtown, glass all the way up. The kind of place where your voice echoes in the lobby and the doorman doesn't smile. Her apartment was white, not off-white or cream, white, like a showroom. You could tell nothing got used more than once. She greeted me with a bright smile and handed me a glass of wine before I even set my purse down. "So glad you made it," she said. "We've got a few others joining, just casual." I walked in and saw them. Two people I didn't know. A man in a tailored suit, woman in some kind of designer jumpsuit. They looked like they belonged on a real estate brochure, not family dinner guests. Rowena placed a hand gently on my back. "Everyone, this is Mari, Gideon's sister. She does the most adorable Southern-style catering on the side." "Catering?" I opened my mouth to correct her, but the man smiled. "Oh, great. Do you have a card? We've been looking for someone for our lake house parties." I half laughed. "Oh no, it's not a business. I just cook for friends and family, really." "Well, she's being modest," Gideon said, stepping in. "She's been cooking since she could walk. Seriously." The guests nodded, smiling politely. I took a sip of wine that didn't calm anything inside me. As we sat for dinner, Rowena slid the conversation toward kitchen remodels and influencer partnerships. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to contribute. At one point, the woman asked, "Do you have a website or is it more word of mouth?" I swallowed and muttered something about not being online much. It felt like a performance where I hadn't seen the script. After the main course, Rowena excused herself to get dessert. When she returned, she placed delicate glass ramekins on the table. "This," she said with a grin, "is my take on that sweet cobbler Mari brought last week. I thought I'd elevate it a bit. You know, give it structure." It looked like someone had taken my dad's favorite comfort dessert and dissected it for an art exhibit. There was a tiny scoop of cinnamon gelato, a crisp apple spiral, and a crumble sprinkled like confetti. Gideon clapped softly. "Wow, that's beautiful." Rowena beamed. "To family, where tradition meets taste." Eventually. I smiled. I even laughed, lightly. But inside, it felt like a slap. She didn't just reimagine a dessert. She rewrote it. Took something of mine and made it hers, in front of people who wouldn't know better. It was polished, pretty, soulless. I finished the bite, told her it was lovely. Back in my car, I gripped the steering wheel. The leather felt cold, my chest tight. I remembered my mother once saying, "Don't outshine people who think they're doing you a favor. They don't forgive that." I'd followed that rule too well. They didn't want me seen. They wanted me staged. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. A text from Gideon. "They loved you tonight. You might be in a few Insta stories. Hope you're okay with that." Okay with that. Let's just say, not for long. Rowena had sent a formal invitation this time. Digital, elegant, unnecessary. The kind you send when you're trying to prove something. The kind that makes sure people show up dressed for performance, not comfort. I stood outside her door for a second longer than I should have. Then rang the bell. She opened it all, grace and curated warmth. "Mari, you look wonderful. Come in." I stepped into the room. Candlelight, glassware polished to mirror shine, and guests already seated in a careful semicircle around a dining table that probably cost more than my mortgage. The scene was staged, just like last time, but tighter, quieter, controlled. She gestured me toward the seat she'd clearly saved for me, near the end of the table, not the head, not quite the foot, just far enough from the center that you'd have to lean in to be heard. Before I could sit, she touched my arm. "We were just admiring your pie. You have a real talent for this kind of home-style cooking. This kind of—" I smiled. "Thanks. My dad taught me." A woman on my left, mid-50s, leaned in. "How sweet. So it's family tradition? I nodded. He always believed in flavor over flair. Rowena chimed in, too smoothly. Well, we all know Gideon's taste has grown since meeting me. Her laugh was light, but her eyes slid toward my pie. No one laughed. I tucked my napkin onto my lap and said nothing. Dinner started. Rowena poured the wine herself. She made a show of checking bottle labels like she worked a vineyard. Halfway through the first course, she lifted her fork delicately and said, "This is lovely, Mari, though maybe a little lighter on the rosemary next time. I prefer more delicate flavors." Gideon chuckled, poking his fork through the roast. Mari's always been bold with flavors. That's part of her charm, right? Charm. Not skill. Not expertise. Charm. One of the guests, a younger guy in finance by the sound of it, leaned in close and whispered, "It's brave of you to cook such strong flavors in a place like this." I gave a tight smile. Brave. That word didn't belong here, not next to roasted chicken and hand-poured Merlot. I glanced toward the center of the table, where my pie had been earlier. It was gone. Rowena was rearranging the dishes, moving mine to the sideboard, shifting her glassware to center stage. She smiled apologetically. "Just trying to keep things balanced for the camera. Hope you don't mind." She picked up the dessert plates, too. "I'll serve. This is more my domain anyway." The guests barely noticed. No one blinked as my work was moved out of frame. No one asked. I watched as the evening wore on. More wine, more talk. When someone mentioned how lovely the pie smelled, Rowena beat me to it. Yes, Mari's old-school pies are so rare these days. I wanted to bring that comfort back into our aesthetic. I froze. Bring back? She hadn't baked it. She hadn't even touched the crust. Then came the kicker. "I'll be posting a little story about this on my page. It's just too perfect not to share." She smiled wide, held up her phone, took a picture with the pie slightly angled under one of her designer pendant lights. I looked over at Gideon. He was grinning, proud, pleased, not with me, with her, not with the pie, with the brand. And I sat there, fork idle, pie cooling, mouth shut. But my hands? They clenched under the table. This wasn't the first time. It wasn't the first time someone used what I made, what I meant, as garnish. And I was tired of being garnish. I could still hear my father's voice in my head. Taste isn't about flash, it's about heart. He never cooked for cameras. He never served for applause. And neither did I. Until now, something in me shifted. I let them talk. I let them sip their wine and post their stories and pretend like they understood legacy through linen napkins. But I cleared my throat. Quiet, but enough. Forks slowed, heads turned. I smiled, not too wide. "Actually," I said, steady and clear, "I have something I want to share about how this recipe came to be." Silence. Eyes shifted. And I realized some stories aren't meant to stay untold. The moment my words hit the room, I felt it. Stillness. No music. No wine pouring. Just forks lowered and faces turned. I could hear myself breathe. "I have something I want to share about how this recipe came to be," I said. I didn't look at Rowena. I didn't need to. I looked down at the slice of pie in front of me and spoke like I wasn't afraid of the silence anymore. "My dad taught me this recipe when I was 12, I began. "It was during a time when things at home were falling apart. He was trying to keep something normal going for me and my brother. So he taught me how to make this pie, not because it was fancy, but because it reminded him of something that used to feel safe." I paused. The room stayed quiet. He never measured, never followed a book. He just trusted what he felt. That's how I learned. It's not gourmet, but it's real. I met the eyes of a woman across the table. She looked down like she'd swallowed something that wasn't food. I went on. "Now, every time I make it, I think about that moment, about how he turned a hard week into a sweet memory. That's what this pie is. Not a trend, not an aesthetic, just heart." A small nod from the older man on my right. Another guest whispered, "That's beautiful." A younger woman across the table raised her glass. "To Mari," she said, "because that's the real flavor in tonight's dish." Glasses clinked. I didn't expect it, but it landed like a quiet wave of relief. Another guest asked, "Do you share your recipes anywhere, like a blog?" Before I could answer, Gideon chuckled. "Mari's more of a slow burn. She doesn't do spotlight." I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't laugh along, didn't shrink back. "I might," I said simply. And I meant it. I felt seen, not as someone's sister, not as a prop, but as myself. For a few minutes, it was enough. Until Rowena stepped in. She raised her glass like the moment belonged to her. "Mari's amazing," she said, her voice just soft enough to pass for warmth. "But it's true what they say. When trauma bakes into tradition, you get interesting stories." The smile on my face didn't move, but my chest tightened. She wasn't done. "It's inspiring how people can find beauty in pain," she added. "Just don't forget the recipe next time." Laughter, awkward, uneven, rippled around the table. One guest turned to another and whispered, "Did she really just say that?" I heard it. Everyone did. I looked at Rowena. Her smile hadn't budged. I looked at Gideon. His eyes were frozen in that half grin that didn't quite know where to land. I could feel the flush rising in my face. Shame? Embarrassment? Maybe both. But then something else followed. Rage. Not loud, not hot, not theatrical. Something cold, old, settled. I thought of all the times my mother sat at tables just like this one, biting her tongue until it bled. I remembered watching her hold back. Always polite, always silent. I placed my glass down gently, looked Rowena dead in the eye. "It's funny," I said, calm as stone, "how some people use other people's stories as seasoning for their own egos." Silence again. This one was heavier. No one laughed. Rowena's face didn't change. But the air around her did. Gideon looked like he'd swallowed his own tongue. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I stood up, smoothed my dress, and said, "Thanks for the evening." A few guests murmured polite goodbyes. One of them said, just loud enough for me to catch it, "That was overdue." I didn't look back. The hallway outside felt warmer than the whole apartment. By the time I got to my car, the night air had cooled my skin, but not the fire in my chest. It wasn't anger anymore. It was power. I sat for a moment, then started the engine. On the way home, I didn't replay the scene. I didn't doubt myself. I didn't shrink. I just drove. And when I got home, as I tossed my keys in the bowl, my phone buzzed. "Gideon, can we talk? Rowena's upset. You didn't have to do that." I stared at the screen. Didn't have to. No, I didn't have to, but I finally did. I woke up with sunlight slipping through the blinds and a pressure in my chest I couldn't name. Not grief, not quite anger, something heavier than both, like standing still after your body's been running from something for too long. I sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on knees, replaying the night before. That pie, that toast, that look in Rowena's eyes, and Gideon's silence. For a second, I questioned it all. Again. Was I too blunt? Too proud? Did I ruin the peace? Then I remembered. There was never peace. Only pretending. I glanced at my phone. That message was still sitting there. "Can we talk? Rowena's upset. You didn't have to do that." I let it breathe. And then I responded. "Fine. Let's meet. The old diner. Noon." He agreed right away. The place hadn't changed. Same cracked leather booths, same overworked waitress named Carla with a tired smile and a fresh coffee pot. Gideon got there first. He stood when I walked in, awkward, like he wasn't sure if he should hug me or salute me. We settled into a booth. He started light, of course. "The pie, though, that was something else, Mari. You really do have a gift." I nodded. "Thanks." But I knew this wasn't about dessert. He took a breath. "Rowena's. She's really upset. She didn't expect things to go that way." I stared at him. Let the pause thicken. He kept going. "I just thought, maybe if you could talk to her, clear things up." "Clear what up?" "That it wasn't personal." "You mean apologize?" He didn't answer, just looked at his plate like it held the solution. I let the words hang. You want me to apologize for defending myself in a room where I was stripped of every ounce of credit and turned into a talking point? He shifted in his seat. She didn't mean it like that. You know how she is. She just… Gideon, I cut in. I know exactly how she is. His mouth tightened. It was just a dinner. We've all had tough nights. And that was the moment. That was when I saw it. Not just the man in front of me, but every version of him I'd carried since we were kids. I saw 13-year-old Mari standing up for him when he was cornered in that school hallway. I saw every time I took the blow so he didn't have to. I've always protected you, I said. But when it's me, I'm too much. He looked up, eyes wide. That's not fair. No, I said, voice steady. It's not. He exhaled, frustration leaking from every line of his face. I just want things smooth, Mari. I know you do, but smooth isn't always right. I stood. He didn't follow. I didn't ask him to. Back in my car, I leaned into the steering wheel, hands still, heart not racing, just quietly done. Later that evening, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea, phone in hand, scrolling. The usual feed. Then I saw it. Rowena's story, a close-up of that fancy table. Her holding a wine glass with that filtered, effortless glow. The caption? Sometimes grace is letting people speak, even when it hurts. You show up with love, and they show you their wounds. Comments poured in. Queen of composure. Some people just don't like seeing others shine. Grace under fire, that's real. I stared at it. The photos, the tone, the manipulation. She had twisted the whole thing into a soft-lit victim moment. And people were eating it up. No mention of the pie, of my father, of what was really said. I didn't reply. I didn't post anything there. Instead, I walked down the street. Just a few blocks. Toward that old bench by the trees where my dad used to sit after teaching me his recipes. He called it the digestion bench, said food tasted better if you sat still with it afterward. I sat there, breathed. His voice echoed in my head, the way it used to when the kitchen was just ours. Don't cook for applause. Cook to nourish. I pulled out my phone, opened a draft on a blank blog page I'd started years ago but never touched, and I wrote, not names, not blame, just truth. A story about food, family, and how easily love can be repackaged into performance. I didn't edit much, didn't overthink. It wasn't revenge, it was release. Just before I hit publish, a DM popped up. I know what she did to you. Want to talk? I stared at the screen, thumb hovering, because maybe, just maybe, someone else had seen through the glitter in the glass. I stepped into the ballroom for the weekend charity event in downtown. It was perfectly choreographed, long tables with white linen, soft lighting, waiters in black ties, ladies in gowns. An orchestra played softly in the corner. Everything dressed up. Everything meant to impress. A man in a designer suit approached Rowena, eyes scanning her table and me. He asked, "Who does your catering tonight?" Rowena answered before I could. "Oh, Mari Jericho. She's our family's soul behind the scenes." It felt like someone had flipped a switch in my chest. The man glanced at me, then at the servers in uniforms. He frowned for a moment and said, "Oh, so you're the help, right?" I told myself to let it pass. I smiled and corrected him. "Actually, yes. I cooked everything tonight." There was a crack in Rowena's smile. Gideon shifted uneasily beside her. My heart thumped louder than the music. Something made sense. A pattern I'd ignored for years revealed itself in that moment. The polite lies, the gloss and gloss over, the way I was always present but rarely seen. I thought of Dad's kitchen, old pots, chipped wooden spoon, me standing on a stool to reach the counter. He said softly, "Real strength is measured by what you make when no one is watching." I remember tasting gravy that didn't need salt because Dad knew where flavor came from. I remember him teaching me to trust what I felt, not what sounded fancy to someone else. Back in that ballroom, I held this memory like armor. Rowena got up to speak. A smile, praise for family tradition, for how cooking is heritage, how home-style meals are what people crave beneath all the designer plates. She called me Our legacy, said I taught her something about real taste. Applause followed, heads nodded. But then a voice from the crowd, quiet but clear. Isn't that what Rowena copied in that blog post of hers last month? Murmurs followed. Rowena laughed it off, elegant, graceful, but the laughter sounded hollow. I did not speak. I didn't need to yet. Later, a longtime neighbor pulled me aside. She whispered, "Don't let them hollow your truth, Mari. I know who cooked tonight." Her white hair, lined face, her eyes full of recognition. That mattered more than any clapping. Rowena watched me then, her gaze sharp, calculating. As lights dimmed for dessert, I opened my purse and felt the weight of my father's old recipe booklet, the one with his curly handwriting, notes in the margins. I gripped it. It was mine. Rowena's voice floated from the stage again. "We love preserving tradition. Mari taught me that." Her tone soft, showy. I gazed at the page of savory recipes I had carried with me. My dad's handwriting across the cover. Proof. I'd carried this around feeling like it was dust, but tonight it felt clean. I realized then, I wasn't just the background. I had a voice still whispered between candles and small talk, but real. People lined up for pictures with Rowena. They asked her about the event. She thanked them graciously, wearing their praise, and I let them believe what they wanted, because I trusted this moment. I walked to the side of the room, quietly, holding that booklet. I stood there, letting the echoes of whispers, "Thank you, Mari. You deserve credit," wash over me like rain. No confrontation, no shouting, just truth. And I felt hope. I picked up my phone just after dawn. The notification glowed, like something I'd finally been waiting for. "I know what she did to you. Want to talk?" The sender was Natalie J. Vague profile, but one detail stood out. Rowena's college. It hit me like a whisper. Someone from Rowena's past had remembered me. Curiosity tangled with caution. What if it was a trap? I stared at the screen, hands trembling. I typed back, "Yes." The reply came quick. Natalie said she'd been Rowena's roommate, once a culinary partner. Shared ideas. Shared space. Then betrayal. She said Rowena used a concept they'd developed together, passed it off as solo work. Stolen ideas. Broken promises. A ruined chance at a scholarship. Something turned in my chest. It wasn't revenge. It was recognition. Screenshots followed. Blog drafts, margin notes, versions Natalie had kept, but never published. One document had the peach custard tart recipe Natalie had shown me. I compared it to the version Rowena posted last month. Same measurements, same layering, just different lighting. Natalie's voice on the call was steady, hurt, but centered. Together we traced a timeline. College days, first blog posts, early dinners, all pointing in one direction. This wasn't just me. It was a pattern, a blueprint of lies. Later, I plunged into online searches, Reddit threads, food forums. One asked, "Who really wrote the Georgia peach tart?" Someone had uploaded a version identical to mine, matching ingredients and steps. Rowena's rendition appeared in photos, captioned as, "My original twist." No credit, no author name, thousands of shares, comments cheering the flavor, the beauty, praise, but not truth. I felt my heritage, my father's recipes, whispered flavors, years of late nights in the kitchen, made public without my name, betrayed, but also alive. Instead of snapping off a public post, I took quiet action. I reached out to a food columnist I'd met at a local fundraiser, told her I was gathering my own story about stolen culinary legacy, about women who cook in shadow, not accusing, just documenting. The columnist listened, said she wanted to help. That night, I cooked my father's stew, the one he'd simmered when winter turned everything gray. I ate it alone, phone off. Ella Fitzgerald played low. The world outside carried on. I held on to that simmering warmth. Validation felt fragile, but worth it. I drafted, naming no names, just telling truths the world seemed ready to ignore. The sound of my fingers tapping keys felt like reclaiming space, recording every recipe, every conversation, every betrayal, not for applause, for history, for honesty. Before I published, I messaged Gideon. You might want to read something tomorrow. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. Morning came. My phone exploded with notifications, reposts, comments, messages. One voice message from Gideon. We need to talk. I closed my laptop. I sipped coffee in silence. Truth had found me. I replayed Gideon's voice message 3 times before calling him back. There wasn't anger in his voice, just something slow and tired. Regret, maybe. He asked if we could meet. No drama, no explanation, just a park bench we both knew well. It was the one we used to race toward after school. Funny how many years later, it still held its shape, even when we didn't. He was already there when I arrived. Hands clasped, back straight. But when he spoke, it felt like something cracked open. I knew, he said. Just like that. No preface. About the recipe, I saw it years ago, when Rowena posted her inspired by family piece. I didn't interrupt. I told myself it wasn't a big deal, that it would blow over, that peace was better than another argument at Mom's house. That silence between us was louder than anything he could have said. Not guilt, not excuses, just the truth, finally aired out. I felt the sting crawl up the back of my neck like betrayal wearing familiar shoes. You weren't protecting me, I said, voice level. You were protecting the version of peace that made your life easier. He didn't fight it, didn't deny it. We sat for a long while like that, a pair of adults who never learned how to grow up together. I didn't cry. He didn't apologize beyond those words, but something settled, like dust finally choosing where to land. Eventually, I told him, I'm not ready to forgive you. My hands were folded in my lap. I looked straight ahead. But I'm also not going to keep dragging this around. I'm putting it down. Doesn't mean I'm handing it to you. I'm just done carrying it. He nodded. Quiet. Not cowed. Just finally listening. We didn't hug. Didn't even shake hands. But when I walked away, it didn't feel unfinished. The article went live that weekend. The food columnist had done it justice, kept it about the bigger picture. Women's stories, recipes lost and retold. No names named, but if you knew, you knew. It didn't take long before it made the rounds. Food blogs, interviews, quiet inbox messages from others with similar stories. And then, an invitation. A small culinary heritage conference in Savannah wanted me to speak, share my story, my recipes. I almost said no, almost. But Natalie was already on the speaker list. And when we stood together on stage talking about memory, loss, and how food carries truth when people don't, something shifted. People clapped, yes, but it was the kind of clapping that felt like listening, not applause for the sake of noise. That night, I came home to a note in handwriting I hadn't seen in years, my mother's. Saw your interview, proud of you. Dad would have said, that's my girl. I folded the paper slowly, tucked it in the recipe booklet where his handwriting still lived. Then I made his stew. The real way. The way he taught me when I was too short to reach the stove. I ate on the porch, a soft breeze brushing my shoulder. No phone, no updates, no explaining. Gideon never called again. And for once, I didn't wait for it, because I'd already said everything that needed saying. I didn't get justice the way I imagined it, but I got something better. I got my name back.